Hi, and welcome to this session on activating resources using SFX Admin Lite. My name is Carrie Bartels, and I'm a trainer in Ex Libris North America. First, we're going to do an overview of SFX terminology, since you'll see this terminology throughout the SFX administrative interface and the SFX documentation. Then you'll be introduced to the SFX Admin Lite interface, which allows you to do management of your SFX resources, such as activating or deactivating resources, adding local thresholds, and then testing resources in the SFX menu. The key objectives for this session are being able to activate objects using the SFX Admin Lite interface, add local thresholds, in other words, date coverages, if you don't use the default thresholds from the vendor, and then also be able to test activated titles in the SFX menu. So let's do a review of SFX terminology. You may remember these terms from the SFX introduction session, but let's just quickly review them now. Remember that a source in SFX is where the user starts his or her search. And let's take a look at a couple of examples. Here we have the EBSCOhost or an EBSCOhost database, Academic Search Complete. And this is an example of a source where the user starts their search, they come up with a list of results, and for each of those results we see an SFX button. When the user clicks on that SFX button, the SFX menu displays, listing all of the options for finding the full text, for example, of the article. Primo is another example of a source. The user does their search in Primo, comes up with a list of results, and the user can click on either the View Online tab or actually the More tab as well and see the SFX menu that's displayed. When you're ready to go live with SFX, you'll want to contact each of the vendors that you want to have as a source. And you'll need to give them information such as your SFX base URL, which will be provided to you by your Ex Libris project team, as well as the image for the SFX button. And this is so the vendor can include the button in their interface. Your SFX project team, as well as the SFX source configuration guide in the documentation center, and I'll be giving you the URL to the documentation center towards the end of the session. That will provide you with a list of vendors that can be used as SFX sources, as well as it will provide you the information that you'll need to discuss with your vendors. So let's talk next about targets and how targets, services, objects, and object portfolios all relate to one another. The target is the database where your users find what they're looking for. So for example, the database that has the full text of an article, or the database that has the abstract of an article. Services provide the means of communication between the source and the target systems. So the user can get to the full text, can get to the abstract, can get to the table of contents, and so on. An object portfolio is the collection of e-journals or e-books associated with any given target and target service. And then lastly, an object in SFX is a serial or a monograph title. Now again, in SFX, the target, the service, the object, and the object portfolio are all components of the link resolution process. The target is, again, where your users find what they're looking for. So in this example, they find what they're looking for in EBSCOhost Academic Search Premier. The service is what they're requesting and the connection to it. So in this case, they're requesting full text. The object portfolio associated with the target service, in this case, contains 21,735 e-journals. And one of those journals is the object, Publishers Weekly. You can think of each of these components as levels in SFX. We have the target level, the target service level, and then we take these last two together. This is the object portfolio level. An object is always going to be associated with a target and a target service. And it's possible for an object to exist in more than one target. So for example, you can subscribe to Publishers Weekly not only through EBSCO, but perhaps through Gale or ProQuest, just to name a few. And it can exist also in more than one service. It's possible you can get the abstract or the table of contents in addition to the full text for Publishers Weekly. Because of this, objects are not independent from the target and the target service. Each component, or level as I think of it, has to be active for the resource to be available in SFX. So in this case, if I newly subscribe to Publishers Weekly through Academic Search Premier, and I want to activate Publishers Weekly in SFX, I'd actually have to make sure that all 3 levels are activated. The journal itself, Publishers Weekly, the service, Get Full Text, and the target as well, the target level, and in this case it's EBSCOhost Academic Search Premier. I mentioned the SFX Admin Lite interface earlier, so let me introduce that to you now. As a TotalCare customer, Ex Libris provides full software and hardware maintenance for SFX. And this includes software and hardware updates as well as the maintenance of your knowledge base. During your implementation, we'll be configuring and customizing SFX for you based on input and feedback that we receive during the implementation process. And then going forward, we'll take care of activating new resources that you subscribe to, or we'll deactivate resources that you no longer subscribe to, and so on. You'll want to check your Ex Libris SFX contract to find out the time frame for how long it takes to do target activations or deactivations, customization changes, and so on. That said, we also provide a web-based administrative tool called SFX Admin Lite for you to do some management of electronic resources in your SFX knowledge base. Now, most of the time, you'll log a support case to have Ex Libris activate or deactivate resources for you in SFX. But in some cases, you may want to do your own activations or deactivations. Your SFX Admin Lite URL and login information will be provided to you by your Ex Libris project team. And then once you log in, there are 2 areas that you'll have access to within the SFX Admin Lite interface, KB Manager and Statistics. If you want to activate or deactivate an object, in other words, a title that's in a package because you subscribed to it or maybe you no longer subscribe to it, you'd use the KB Manager section for objects. If you want to run a statistical report, you would use the Statistics section of the Admin Lite interface. And we'll talk more about statistics in a separate session. This session will focus solely on objects. So now that we've taken just a brief look at the Admin Lite interface, let's focus on how to find or activate and deactivate objects using it, as well as we'll talk about adding local coverage dates, in other words, local thresholds, and we'll also talk about testing resources in the SFX menu. I mentioned previously that most of the time you will probably log a support case to have the TotalCare support team do activations or deactivations of resources for you. Alternatively, though, you can search for an object, in other words, a particular publication title that you subscribe to through a package, and activate or deactivate the object using the SFX Admin Lite interface. And to do that, you'll click on the Objects link in the interface itself. The Objects search screen, as we see here, and I'll show you this live in just a moment, that allows you to search for any publication title in SFX. And at this point, let's go there live. So I've logged into my Admin Lite interface, and I'm going to search for a particular object that I want to activate. So I'm going to click on the Objects link. This takes us to the Search Objects screen, and you can select the field that you'd want to search. So we have lots of options, clicking on the drop-down here. And you can decide how the search terms are applied. Notice we have begins with, contains, and exact. We also have Boolean operators that are available as well. It's also possible to add or remove conditions. So I can add another condition, or I can decide to remove that condition. And notice I can indicate ISSN to go along with the title, ISBN, for instance, in the case of ebooks maybe. So I have several options here in terms of searching. Our scenario here is that we have just subscribed to a new title, the Journal of Biochemical Toxicology. And this title is within a package that we subscribe to. We need to activate that title or object in SFX terms so that it can appear in the SFX menu. So at this point, I'm going to search for the title of the journal. And this is the Journal of Biochemical toxicology. If I had the ISSN, I can include that also. In this case, I don't, so I'm just going to leave it at searching for the title. And I'll click on the search button. A results list of object titles displays. And in some cases, there may actually be multiple objects listed here, so you'd need to decide which is the correct one that you'd want to work with. To view the data for an object, you can click on the V button over here on the left-hand side. V stands for View, and you'll also see that at the very bottom of the screen. So I can click on V for View, and I can see the data associated with this particular title, and this is where I can confirm that this is indeed the correct object that I want to activate or deactivate, and in this case, activate. So I can just double check. Here's the main title, here's the abbreviation, here's the ISSN, and this is for object type, this is a journal. So at this point, I can determine, yes, this is the correct object that I want to work with. I'm going to click back on the object's search results link, and that will take me back to the search results page. Before I go any further, I do want to mention that you can also revise your search by clicking on the plus sign for Show Search Box, and that will expand the section, and this is where I can modify my search as needed. At this point, I'm just going to click on the minus sign now to collapse that search box. So once you've searched for and identified the correct object, you'll notice a few other things. First of all, if we look to the right, this OP column, OP stands for Object Portfolio. And notice that there's a little green dot that displays there. This means that the object is already activated in a portfolio in SFX. However, at this point, we don't know which particular package or target in SFX terms that the object is activated in. Now we'll see which target the object is activated in when we click on the P button. P stands for portfolio, and then again, if you look at the bottom of the screen, that's where it mentions it also. The P stands for portfolios. So by clicking on the P button here, we are taken to a full list of portfolios for targets and target services that the object is included in. And this is the screen that we're going to use to activate the title. So what we'll do is we would look for the correct package. Notice the package column here. In other words, this is the target. And we'll also look for the correct service level as well, the correct target service that we subscribe to for the object. And then we would click on the check mark next to it, and that will turn it yellow to activate that object in that target and target service. So let's say this is our object, Journal of Biochemical Toxicology, and we want to activate that in a package that we subscribe to, number 8 here, Wiley Online Library Backfile Complete. And we want to activate it in the for the target service, Get Full Text. So I'm just going to click on the check mark here in the activation column. And in a moment, here we go. There's the check mark. It's now turned yellow. So this means that this particular object, Journal of Biochemical Toxicology, is now active in Wiley Online Library Backfile Complete for the target service, Get Full Text. Note the yellow check mark up here at the top that already exists for the package or target, CRKN Wiley Online Library. This means that the object is already active in this target and target service of Get Full Text. So that's why we saw the green dot in the OP column in the previous screen. Let me actually just click on back to search results, and we'll go back to that search results page. So here again in the OP column we have that little green dot. That just means that there already is an object that's active in a target and target service. But from this screen we can't tell which target and target service. And if we click on the P button to go to the list of portfolios, here's when we see the yellow check mark, so we can say, okay, this particular title or object was active already in this target and target service. You also may remember from a few minutes ago that I mentioned that all 3 levels, the target level, the target service level, and the object portfolio level, need to be active in SFX for the resource to display in the SFX menu. So what I want you to do now is notice in the package, in other words, the target column, you'll see little green dots next to some of the titles. Also notice that in the service column, we have little green dots next to some of the services. The green dots are visual indicators that the target and the target service levels are activated. And again, it's important to remember that all three levels, the target level, the service level, and the object level, need to be active in order for the title to display in the SFX menu. So the green dot and we'll look at the one we just activated here, the green dot that appears next to Wiley Online Library Backfile Complete, that means that the target level is activated. If we look at the service, get full text for this target, that also has a green dot as well, meaning that the service level is activated. And then we also have a yellow check mark here in the activation column. That means that the third level, the object portfolio level, is active also. So this title, Journal of Biochemical Toxicology, will display in the SFX menu for the target, Wiley Online Library Backfile Complete, for the service, get full text. Now, when you activate the object, you'll also be activating the target and the service levels if they're not already activated. So let's look at another example here. Let's look at Wiley Online Library Journals. And you'll notice that it's actually listed twice in this list, line number 9 and line number 10. And that's because if you look at the service level, there are two services associated with Wiley Online Library Journals. So you can choose to activate one or both of those services. Now in this example, I'm only going to activate the full text service. Notice that there are currently no green dots next to the target and the service level for this particular target and target service. However, when I click on the yellow check mark, you'll notice that, I'll go ahead and click on the activation check mark for this. You'll notice that now green dots appear. So for Wiley Online Library Journals, notice that the target now has a green dot. The service has a green dot for get full text. Notice that get table of contents does not have a green dot, and that's because I didn't activate that service. And then we also have the yellow check mark here indicating that the third level, the object portfolio level, is also active. So since all three levels are active, the Journal of Biochemical Toxicology within Wiley Online Library Journals, get full text, is now active and will appear in the SFX menu. Now let's look at one more example, Elsevier Scopus. Notice that the target and the service levels, and the service that's associated with this is get abstract, they already have green dots. This means that I have other objects activated in this target, Elsevier Scopus, get abstract. So the target and the service levels are already active from those object activations. Now if I wanted to activate this particular object, Journal of Biochemical Toxicology in Elsevier Scopus, get abstract, all I need to do is click on the check mark here. So previously, this particular target, Elsevier Scopus, and the service were already active. They had little green dots, and that's because I had other titles within it already activated. And now since I have the yellow check mark here, that indicates that this particular object, Journal of Biochemical Toxicology, is now also active in that target and target service. To deactivate a title, so for example, if you no longer subscribe to it through the package, then you just simply click on the yellow check mark. And that will turn the check mark gray, as we'll see here. So now the check mark is gray, meaning that the title is now inactive. Let's go back to the slides for just a moment. You may remember from the SFX introduction session that SFX uses conditions on targets, services, or object portfolios to ensure that it's available. And these are called thresholds. Typically, these are coverage dates for a database or a journal title. Or sometimes it's also, or it could be a database requires a specific attribute, like an author's last name or a volume or an issue. That's another type of threshold. But again, typically it's a date threshold. Global thresholds are based on the standard packages supplied by the vendors. And typically, again, this means default coverage dates. If, however, your library's coverage is different from the default, You can customize these thresholds and make them local. Local thresholds will override the global ones without replacing them. So what this means is you can always remove the local threshold and the global one will become the default again. So let's go back to our SFX Admin Lite interface. We're back on our list of portfolios where the Journal of Biochemical Toxicology exists. And I'm going to draw your attention now to the coverage column. This is where you can edit threshold, or in other words, date coverage information by clicking on the coverage link that you see here in the list of portfolios after you've searched for an object. By default, it will indicate the global coverage dates that the vendor supplies. But you can set or localize the coverage dates or volumes or issues that you subscribe to, or you can also indicate an embargo if the title is published but isn't accessible for a certain period of time. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we do that. Let's say for number 9 here, Wiley Online Library Journal, get full text. I look at the coverage, and if I mouse over it, I'm able to see the complete coverage. So from the vendor, this is the default, available from 1986, Volume 1, Issue 1, through 1996, Volume 11, Issue 6. That's the global coverage. So let's say that my library actually doesn't subscribe to it until 1996. We actually subscribe to it from 1986 to 1990. So I can change this coverage. And I do that by clicking on the link. And when I click on the link, another window opens. Here's the current coverage. Again, this is the default coverage coming from the vendor, the global threshold. And this is where it says replace coverage. I can indicate my own local coverage for this particular title. So notice I have the options to include a year, a volume, or an issue. So in this case, I'm going to say that our library subscribes to this from 1986 to 1990 from Wiley Online Library Journals. If I wanted to indicate a specific volume or issue, I can do that here as well. Notice also we have the option to include an embargo or moving wall. So again, if the issue or the particular title rather is published but it isn't accessible for a certain amount of time, that's where I can indicate that here. And then how many months. And when I'm finished, I can click on the Submit button. Before I do that, though, I will mention if there are multiple date ranges that you have coverage for, where perhaps you subscribed to the title, then canceled the subscription, and then subscribed to it again later on, you can click on the Add Coverage Range button. And then that's where you can indicate another range of date coverage that you have. So let's say that we actually picked up the subscription again in 1992, and we have that through 1996. So that's where you can indicate multiple coverages here. And when we're done, we click on the Submit button. The current coverage for this portfolio will be replaced by the new coverage you specified, just a confirmation message. I'm going to click on Submit. And when I do that, if we look back at line number 9 here again for Wiley Online Library Journals for the service Get Full Text, in the coverage area, if I mouse over that, notice that the coverage has changed, and so it indicates now my local threshold, my local coverage for my library. Also notice that the icon in the local column, that will change slightly. And this is another visual indicator that you now have a local threshold for this title in this particular target and target service. Now you can always revert back to the global threshold, again by clicking on the link for the coverage and selecting Clear Coverage Range. And clicking on Submit. Oh, here we go. Another confirmation message. The current coverage for this portfolio will be replaced by the new coverage you specified. I'm going to click on Submit. Just another confirmation message. And looking at line number 9 again, notice we've defaulted back to the global threshold. You can also do some testing for newly activated resources, and you do this by clicking on the little SFX swirly icon here on the far right-hand side in the Actions column. And that will generate the SFX menu, and this is where you can test the connection to the target. So let's say for number 9, again, Wiley Online Library Journals, Get Full Text, I want to test this coverage. And I have my little activation check mark here that's yellow, so that means all 3 levels are active. I click on the SFX swirly icon. This generates the SFX menu, and I can test the connection here by clicking on Wiley Online Library. So notice it says full text available via. Here's my threshold information, so I can just double check that everything looks correct. And again, I can test the connection by clicking on the link. I'll go ahead and close this up. Now, just to give you one more scenario, sometimes when you activate an object where the target and the target service levels are not yet active, you'll receive a message that looks like this. And I'm actually going to use EBSCOhost Electronic Journal Service for this. Get full text. Let's say I want to activate this title, Journal of Biochemical Toxicology, in this particular target and target service. So I click on the yellow check, or click on the check mark. And I get a message that says this portfolio cannot be activated because linking parameter information is required before activation can occur. Please contact your Ex Libris support team for further assistance. Linking parameters are typically authentication information. So for example, username and password information, so that the user is able to actually access the full text to an article in another database. If you get this message, as the message actually says here, log a support case and the support team will activate this resource on your behalf. You can see what linking parameters are needed for the target in the SFX target configuration guide, and then provide the linking parameters, for example, a username and password, to the support team. And they will activate the resource for you as well as configure the linking parameters for the particular target. Go back to the slides, just a couple more things to go over. Let's talk about some general guidelines for deciding on when to use the SFX Admin Lite objects area versus when to log a support case to have the support team do activations or deactivations for you. Generally speaking, most of the time you may probably want to log a support case and have the support team do activations or deactivations for you. But if you want to use the objects area in SFX Admin Lite, there are a few things to keep in mind. First of all, it's best to use the objects area if you only have a few objects to activate or deactivate. And that's because you'll be searching for the object titles one by one and doing the activations or deactivations manually. So if you have access to a new title within a package that's already activated in SFX, you can use the objects area to activate that new object. Also, if the target and the target service levels they should already be active. And in other words, they should have little green dots next to them in the list of portfolios. Or perhaps it's the case where they do, the target does not require linking parameters. So for example, for objects in free targets or for objects in targets that may not require linking parameters. Again, most of the time you'll probably want to log a support case, but just I have a few examples here. Generally speaking, if you have newly subscribed to an aggregator package, you'll want to log a support case to have them activate the target, the service, and the object levels for you, especially since there may be linking parameters required. The other thing to keep in mind is if there are many objects in a target and target service that need activation, you'll probably want the support team to activate those on your behalf then, because again, this is a search by each title in the objects area one by one and do manual activations or deactivations. I'll also note at this point that how to log a support case will be covered in the KB updates and basic troubleshooting session. So this brings us to the end of this session. In brief, we focused on how to activate resources using the SFX Admin Lite interface, and note that you'll search for the object title and activate or deactivate it from there. Add local thresholds, in other words, date coverages to objects if you do not use the default threshold from the vendor. We also looked at testing activated titles in the SFX menu by clicking on the SFX swirly icon that appears in the list of portfolios when you search for an object. And we also looked at some general guidelines for when to log a support case for activations and deactivations, and when to use the SFX Admin Lite objects area to manually do activations or deactivations yourself. Listed here are other available resources that will be helpful when activating resources in SFX. And these can be accessed from the Ex Libris Documentation Center, which can be in turn accessed from the Ex Libris customer site. The URL is listed here, and you will need to log in. You'll want to check with your Ex Libris project team if you don't already have login credentials. The document that I'll point out specifically is the SFX Admin Lite Guide, and that will provide further information about activating objects using the Admin Lite interface. Thanks for joining me in this session.